Power Hour with John Lee.
Not to mention the Oklahoma City bombing. So this is all, I'm giving you this more or less in a timeline. But in 1995, we get the Oklahoma City bombing. 2 years to the day after Waco. And the guy who's supposed to have done it, Timothy McVeigh, gave that as his reason. He said the reason that he blew up the Oklahoma City, the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, was because of Waco. It was revenge for Waco. Because he couldn't believe that could happen in America. So what's he supposed to have done? He's supposed to have parked a van outside the building, a federal building, filled with ammo, and blown it up. Well, A, you're not parking a fucking rental van outside a federal building, right? And B, there was no ammo. You can see that because ammo's toxic. And if there's ammo in the air, it's going to burn your lungs out. Could even kill you. And people are just walking around. There's no ammo in the air, so that's a lie as well. And there were bombs inside the building. You can watch the news reports where they're saying that more bombs have been found. They've found another bomb. They've found another bomb inside the building. The bomb squads are going in. And then they just say, no, just one bomb outside, and it was this car bomb. And you look at the damage done to that building. And Manchester was, my city of Manchester was blown up with an AMFO bomb. I know what it looks like. It doesn't look like that. Right? It takes the glass out, smashes all the windows. It does not break concrete. It's air. Air can't break concrete like that. It just cannot do that kind of damage. It's called Toussaint's damage or something like that. And it can't be done by air. So anyway, that's bollocks. None of the ATF were in that building, Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Department. They weren't there. They were warned, don't go in. And they were involved in Waco as well. Don't go in to work today. And then the building got blown up. Right. The first thing they did, the guys in blue jackets with no letters on, was to secure the area and go in there and start picking up documents and files that were sensitive. And they wouldn't allow anyone to even rescue people that were still alive in the rubble, in the building, until those documents were collected. And who had all these documents in there from various scandals like MENA and like Whitewater and all that? Billy Clinton. Because when he went to Washington, all his records that were kept in Arkansas were moved to the Murrah building in Oklahoma randomly. And that's the building that got blown up. I'm not saying Bill Clinton blew it up. But, I mean, the first thing they did was go in and get rid of all the records before they'd even save people's lives. They could die. You stay there and die until we've got these papers. Absolutely crazy. So Timothy McVeigh, who was that? He was a guy, he was an ex-military man. He was a soldier, prolific soldier actually, a total American patriot who apparently just left the army, even though that story's full of holes, and went to live in a place called Elohim City, which was full of domestic terrorists, people that wanted to attack the government. But it was totally infiltrated with agents. Every second person in Elohim City was a CIA agent or a DEA agent, and they've given testimony about it. You know, it's not a secret that they were there, but there were so many of them there. And Timothy McVeigh had always said that he was an undercover Black Ops agent, so I don't know. Was he involved in it? Did they use him? But the story is that it was just one guy, as always. It's always just one guy. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that there are many eyewitnesses to the fact that he wasn't on his own. He was in the van with another guy. He was seen by like 27 different eyewitnesses that were totally disconnected from each other. All said, yeah, he was with this guy, and described the same guy. And that guy was known in the media as John Doe 2. So they launched the biggest manhunt in American history to look for this guy, John Doe 2. Spent something like $10 million on the search for this guy. And then after searching for him for a while, they said, oh yeah, he doesn't actually exist. Well, what about the 27 eyewitnesses that described him exactly the same, including his tattoo that he had on his forearm of a snake? All of them literally said he had a tattoo of a snake on his forearm. All these 27 people completely imagined this big stocky guy with a snake tattoo on his arm. Doesn't exist. Why did you spend millions looking for him? Don't know, doesn't exist. Shut up. Go away. And part of the bullshit that they needed to bring out to reinforce this nonsense narrative was that all of the cameras, again, just like with Princess Diana, which is another thing, all of the cameras stopped working. Then that was proven to be nonsense. So they said, oh, well, we've got the tapes, but you can't see them. Then it was, why not? It's a public building. We pay for those cameras. We've lost the tapes. I mean, just lie after lie after lie to cover up the fact that more than one person was involved. In fact, they even made a film called Arlington Road with Tim Robbins and Jeff Bridges about this, about the fact that one guy at the end of the film, it's a spoiler, but one guy gets tricked into blowing up a building, but it's actually a network of people behind him who do that professionally. Really good film, brilliant film, and it's based on this. Absolutely clearly based on this. And a couple of people who knew too much in this case were Terence Wakey and Jesse Trentadue. Totally disconnected people in every way. Terence Wakey was a cop, big black fella, and he was there on the day of Oklahoma City bombing. And he was a hero. He kept running in and dragging people out of the rubble, saving people's lives. And he started saying the wrong things, asking the wrong questions. And he started getting death threats and all this kind of stuff. Harassment. He was being followed everywhere. And this is a cop. He was a hero. He saved many people's lives on the day. But that wasn't good enough. He was a problem. And his wife was threatened. And his kids were threatened. And everything was threatened. And then one day, Terence Wakey says to his mate, he's supposed to be meeting his mate for lunch. And he says, well, look, I've got these feds following me. I just want to go and leave some documents in a safe, basically, in one of these lockers, And then I'll lose the feds, which obviously he felt able to do because he was a cop, I suppose. I'll lose the feds and then I'll come and meet you for lunch. Never came back. He was gone. This chair was probably the most annoying chair in the world. So Terence Wakey, he goes and apparently leaves these documents wherever he's going, and he's got the feds up his ass. And he never comes back. And this is the suicide, right, that Terence Wakey apparently did. This is the official story, right? Wikipedia will tell you this. He committed suicide by sitting in his car, beating himself repeatedly for ages. Punching himself, hitting himself with a bat or something. He was absolutely full of bruises and contusions and cuts. He's just battered himself. Then he's got a knife. At some point, he's actually handcuffed himself. They're massive handcuff marks. At some point, he's handcuffed himself and probably done this or something to get those marks on his wrist. Then he's unhandcuffed himself so he can get a knife and start stabbing himself. He's stabbed himself like 13 times. Including in the neck. Then he's got out of the car, but he's got his gun first, you see. So he put the knife down and got the gun out. Then he's got out of his car, leaving his keys in the ignition. He's got out of the car, closed the door, locked it without the key. Maybe it locked without the key, fair enough. But don't forget to lock the car before you go and blow your brains out. And he's now bleeding profusely. He's stabbed himself 13 times. He's been beating himself for the last half an hour with a baseball bat or whatever. And don't forget, he's anemic. So it's medically impossible for him to continue walking. He's anemic. He would have just bled out. He would have been unconscious in seconds. But no, he walks half a mile across rough terrain through fields with the gun, finds himself a nice little tree, sits down next to the tree, bang, murders himself and manages to hide the gun. So after he's already dead, he then hides the gun. I've got problems with that. And that's literally the case. Again, the same with Vince Foster. He's managed to shoot himself in the mouth without getting any blood on the gun. And, that nobody ever finds the bullet. This guy's dead in a field now. He's apparently tortured himself and then shot himself and then managed to find a way to hide the gun in a field after he's dead. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And this was a cop. He was a hero who saved lives on the day of the event, who was then clearly murdered because he was asking the wrong questions and saying the wrong things. And there's another guy who didn't witness anything, Jesse Trentadue. His big mistake was looking like the picture of the John Doe that they then said didn't exist, John Doe 2. They said he didn't exist. And Jesse Trentadue had a snake tattoo on his forearm, and he looked similar, very similar to the pictures and the eyewitness accounts. So he's picked up for parole violation, and he's flown out to Oklahoma, miles from where he lived, and they put him in a kind of a prison transit centre, and he commits suicide all of a sudden. Jesse Trentadue commits suicide, right? Not suicidal at all, not that kind of person, no reason to commit suicide. He's a very happy man, but he suddenly commits suicide. And how does he do it? Well, he does it by torturing himself. He took the family had to fight to get the body back. They wanted to incinerate the body, but the Oklahoma state governors wouldn't let them do it. It's against the law in Oklahoma to do that. But the federal government wanted to cremate him immediately, but they weren't able to. So the family got the body back, and it was full of bruises. His skull was cracked, all his bones were broken. They'd been beating him on the bottom of the feet, which is standard torture. His body was full of Coca-Cola, which they used to enhance the pain in torture because of the caffeine. Apparently, it makes everything hurt more. And this is the way that they say that he killed himself, by beating himself to death and torturing himself. And even though he's in a prison cell, managing to drink litres of Coca-Cola, which I don't really think you can get in prison anyway. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They beat him to death, and the brother of Jesse Trentadue got a phone call from Timothy McVeigh saying, "Your brother's been killed. It was the FBI. It was an interrogation gone wrong. They thought it was this guy, this John Doe 2, and they beat him to death. I'm very sorry." And that's what happened. And even when they went into his cell 6 months later and they did the line, what's it called? The chemical that makes blood, luminol, that makes blood shine. So it lit up like a Christmas tree when they went in his cell 6 months later. So he was clearly murdered. And this is all to cover up the Oklahoma City bombing, which is shady to say the least, and where lots of documents were basically found and confiscated while people were left dying in the rubble. That takes us perfectly to Building 7, 9/11. Yes, I'm going there. What's the problem with Building 7? Well, mainly that most people in the world don't even know what Building 7 is. It's the Solomon Brothers building in New York. So we know that on September 11th, 2001, a couple of planes flew into the Twin Towers. Massive tragedy, 3,000 deaths approximately. People are still dying from that because of the cancers that came from the pyroclastic flow of the buildings when they fell. Real bad tragedy. I'll admit straight away, I don't know who did it. You're forced to choose between some guy in a cave in Afghanistan or George Bush. I don't believe either. I don't really know. I don't know who did it, but those buildings came down, in my opinion, very, very strong opinion, in a controlled demolition. No buildings like that have ever collapsed in history due to fire or impact. Never. It's never happened before, and it's never happened since. It happened 3 times in one day. And the first 2 buildings, they were hit by planes at least. Building 7 was never hit by a plane. And it was a 47-storey skyscraper. This is a big building. And there was a fire on one floor, really. An office fire. And the building collapsed because of an office fire. It didn't just burn up some chairs and leave the walls all black. No. It caused the building to collapse into its own footprint, which is scientifically impossible. Right? The only way you can do that, and it actually achieved free fall, which according to Isaac Newton's laws of gravity is impossible, because you have to take out all the resistance below it in order for it to free fall. There's nothing under it. The only way to achieve that is to detonate charges on the pillars at the same time to take all the pillars out. That's why there's no resistance. So it can just fall like a tennis ball in a vacuum. Like that. Vroom. That is impossible. Fires don't do that to buildings. But they do 3 times in one day, for some reason, in New York. And NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology in America, they were hired basically to do a report on these events. And it took 6 years, or maybe 7 years, to come back and give a report of the events which didn't even mention Building 7. Didn't even mention a 47-story skyscraper collapsing into its own footprint in 6 seconds in the middle of New York. Do you think you might want to mention that bit? So you've got 2 towers here, so they talk about that, but they don't mention the other one that collapsed over here. And that's why most people that you talk to, you say Building 7, they don't even know what you're talking about. Because it doesn't fit the narrative. No planes hit it. Why did it collapse? We're going to have to change the regulations for firefighting worldwide. Because if office fires can cause a building to collapse into its own footprint, you can't send firefighters into a building to fight a fire, because we know that the whole thing can just collapse like a pancake at any minute and do it in 6 seconds. And we also know apparently that Isaac Newton was completely wrong. Isaac Newton was full of shit, because, you know, the laws of gravity don't work apparently. Well, of course they do work. It was a controlled demolition. And what you have to remember about that is it takes a long time to prepare a controlled demolition like that. You don't do that in a couple of minutes. That takes weeks, even months. Who had access to that building? Look at who was in the building. The CIA, you know, FBI, everyone had office in there. It was what we call an alphabet soup. How are some Saudis and Afghans or whatever going to get in and out of that building every day to place those charges so they can detonate the building and bring it down? It's just not feasible. Somebody did it. Somebody, I don't know who it was. It wasn't George Bush. Somebody did it, but it wasn't some, you know, some half illiterate guys from Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan walking in and out of the building with explosive devices every day. That's just bullshit. That's clearly bullshit. So I don't know who did it, but I do know that the BBC knew it was going to happen before it happened, because they reported it live. It went live 40 minutes before the building collapsed. The BBC were telling us all, Building 7 has also collapsed, the Solomon Brothers building collapsed a few minutes ago. And the woman's saying it, and the building's still behind her. It hasn't collapsed yet. It's there, perfectly solid, nothing wrong with it. I mean, it had a fire in it, but it's not going to collapse. There's no indication it's going to collapse. And she's on television talking about the collapse before it even happened. I think someone's gone off script. Maybe the time difference, I don't know. But they've got the script saying Building 7 collapsed, and she's reading it. She's saying, oh yeah, Building 7 collapsed. It's behind you, love. Turn round and have a look. It's a big 47-story building. So why are the BBC saying that a building is collapsed before it collapsed and then it collapses? If it's a mistake, it's a mistake. The building doesn't collapse. It hasn't collapsed, whatever. But if you go on television and say it's collapsed and then 40 minutes later it collapses, you've got some questions to answer, but never asked. She has never been asked. The BBC have never addressed that, and they've even been taken to court. Who told you that building collapsed? Come on, you've put it on television. Who told you that? You're the British Broadcasting Corporation. You're not a private company. Who gave you that information? And it's called Reuters. No, Reuters is a news agency. Where did they get it from? What's the source of that information that building collapsed? Don't ask that. Conspiracy theory. By the way, put options, what are they? A put option is when you think that the stock of a company, the value of a company is going to go down. So call options is a standard one where you think, right, this is going to be a good month for Microsoft because they've got a new product. So I'm going to basically bet on Microsoft on the stocks going up, and when they do, I'll make money. A put option is the opposite. It's when you think that the value of a company is going to go down, and you basically bet on that. And when the stocks go down, when the values go down, you can make a lot of money. It's called a put bet or a put option. The airlines that were involved in 9/11, the planes that were hijacked from those American Airlines was one. Those airlines that were actually hijacked, there was an incredible quantity of put betting going against those companies just prior to 9/11. It's something, like 500% or some crazy number. It's up, massive amount of put betting going on these exact airlines that were involved in 9/11 before 9/11 happened. People knew that was going to happen. And the investigation that didn't really do anything, they said, well, we couldn't really connect those put bets to Osama bin Laden. Right, well, who do you connect them to then? Connect them to somebody and tell us who it was, because they knew that 9/11 was going to happen. And they said well, the issue of financing 9/11 was of little practical significance. What? Who paid for it was not important. It's not important who paid for it. It's not important who knew it was going to happen, who was betting on it before it happened. And there's actually about $4 million unclaimed dollars because somebody's bet on that and they don't want to go and say, yeah, I knew 9/11 was going to happen. That's why I bet on it. Give me my money. And of course, when the building went down, a lot of evidence was destroyed, just like in the Oklahoma City bombing. You know,